The Secretary of State just admitted something. The United States government is acting as a banker for Venezuela's oil money, not facilitating, not overseeing, banking. And the cash is sitting in Qatar right now. Senators are losing their minds trying to figure out who authorized this deal. This happened 3 days ago. Almost nobody covered it. And what got buried in that hearing is going to reshape how America does foreign policy for the next decade. January 15th, 2025. Marco Rubio walks into his confirmation hearing to become Secretary of State. Standard procedure. Senators ask questions. Nominee gives careful answers. Everyone goes home. Except this time, Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia asks about Venezuela. And Rubio's answer detonates. He confirms that the United States approved oil sales by the Maduro regime. Oil sales worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And the money from those sales is not coming to America, not going to Venezuela's government, not being held in escrow at a U.S. bank. It's in Qatar, $200 million. Blocked account, Qatari financial institution, and Rubio says this with a straight face, like it's the most normal thing in the world. Senator Kaine does not think it's normal. Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon does not think it's normal. And by the end of that exchange, you watch both senators realize something. They're staring at something that might be legal, but feels completely wrong. Here's what Rubio actually said. The United States gave permission for Venezuela to sell oil. The revenue goes into an account that Venezuela cannot access without U.S. approval. That account is in Qatar because if the money touched U.S. banks, creditors could seize it immediately. Creditors. People and institutions that Venezuela owes billions of dollars to. Court judgments, defaulted bonds, settlements. If that oil money hits American financial systems, it gets frozen instantly. Lawsuits descend. The cash disappears into legal battles. So instead, the money sits in Doha, and the U.S. State Department acts as the gatekeeper. Now let's pause here. This is where it gets complicated. This is also where it gets dangerous. Rubio frames this as leverage. He says the blocked funds give America negotiating power. Want to pay your teachers, Maduro? Release political prisoners. Want to fund hospitals? Stop rigging elections. The money becomes a carrot and a stick. Senators are not buying it. Kaine pushes back immediately. He wants to know if Congress approved this arrangement. Rubio says it falls under executive authority. Kaine asks if there's a written agreement. Rubio says the deal is still being formalized. Still being formalized. That means when Rubio walked into that hearing, there was no signed document laying out the terms. No paper trail, no legislative review, just an understanding between the executive branch and a foreign government about oil sales and blocked accounts in the Middle East. Merkley jumps in. He's visibly frustrated. He starts connecting dots. If the U.S. is managing Venezuela's oil revenue, who audits that? Where's the inspector general? Who makes sure the money goes to humanitarian relief and not into someone's offshore account? Rubio's answer. The audit is not finalized. Not finalized. $200 million. No completed audit. No inspector general assigned. No written agreement. And senators are finding out about this during a confirmation hearing. This is not how foreign policy is supposed to work, because here's what should have happened. The administration negotiates a deal with Venezuela. They present it to relevant congressional committees. They brief the intelligence community. They assign an inspector general to monitor compliance. They establish clear metrics for success. They create a paper trail. Then they implement the policy. That's the process. That's how oversight works. Instead, we have senators asking basic questions during a confirmation hearing and getting answers that raise more questions than they solve. Where's the written agreement? Still being formalized. Where's the audit? Not finalized. Who approved this? Executive authority. These are not answers. These are delays. Let me tell you what makes this even worse. The confirmation hearing is the wrong venue for this conversation. Confirmation hearings are designed to evaluate whether a nominee is qualified for the position. They're not designed for policy oversight. They're not the place where major foreign policy initiatives get disclosed for the first time. But that's exactly what happened here. Senators discovered a significant shift in Venezuela policy through questions asked during a confirmation hearing, not through formal briefings, not through classified notifications to relevant committees, not through the normal channels that exist precisely for this purpose, through questions asked on the record in a public hearing. That tells you everything about how the administration views congressional oversight. They don't. They view Congress as an obstacle to work around, not as a constitutional partner in foreign policy. And the Venezuela oil deal is a perfect example of this mindset. The executive branch decides to approve oil sales from a sanctioned regime. They set up an offshore account to hold the revenue. They claim authority to manage hundreds of millions of dollars. And then they inform Congress only when directly asked. This is not how the system is designed to function. The Constitution gives Congress significant authority over foreign policy. The power of the purse, the power to regulate commerce, the power to declare war, the Senate's role in confirming ambassadors and ratifying treaties. These aren't symbolic authorities. They're meant to create checks and balances, to prevent the executive branch from conducting foreign policy unilaterally. But over decades, that balance has shifted. Executive power has expanded. Congressional oversight has weakened. And now we have situations like this, where the State Department manages foreign government oil revenue through an offshore account with minimal congressional input. Let's talk about why this matters beyond the obvious corruption risks, because there are 3 layers to this story. The first layer is just the surface. Layer 1, the legal framework. Venezuela is under U.S. sanctions. Maduro's regime cannot freely sell oil on international markets. But sanctions have carve-outs, exceptions. The executive branch controls those exceptions. So technically, the president, through the State Department, has the authority to approve limited oil sales if it serves U.S. interests. What constitutes U.S. interests? That's the question. Rubio argues that blocking the funds gives America leverage to push for democratic reforms in Venezuela, humanitarian relief, political prisoner releases, a transition of power. Senators argue that this creates a slush fund with no oversight, that the executive branch is making foreign policy decisions involving hundreds of millions of dollars without consulting Congress, that this looks dangerously similar to off-the-books operations that went sideways in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they keep bringing up Iraq. Multiple senators reference the development fund for Iraq. Billions of dollars, minimal oversight, contracts awarded to cronies, money that just vanished. Inspector General reports that read like crime novels. The development fund for Iraq was established after the 2003 invasion. It held Iraqi oil revenue and seized assets from the Hussein regime. The U.S. Coalition Provisional Authority managed it, and the oversight was catastrophic. Auditors found that billions of dollars moved with minimal documentation. Cash was transported in duffel bags. Contracts were awarded without competitive bidding. Payment vouchers were missing or fabricated, and much of the money simply disappeared. By the time comprehensive audits were completed, the damage was done. The money was gone. Contractors had vanished. And accountability was impossible because the systems to track spending had never been properly established. Senators remember this. They watched it unfold. They read the IG reports. They held hearings where officials testified that they had no idea where hundreds of millions of dollars went. And now they're watching the Venezuela oil deal unfold with similar characteristics. Money accumulating offshore, vague approval processes, no finalized oversight mechanisms, promises that audits will happen later. The pattern is identical, and that's what terrifies them. Rubio pushes back. He says this is different. The Venezuela funds are blocked. They're not being spent without review. The U.S. is just acting as the financial manager until conditions are met. Financial manager. That phrase is doing a lot of work because managing someone else's money, even blocked money, means decisions get made, approvals get granted, payments get processed, and every single one of those actions creates opportunities for things to go wrong. Who decides which projects get funded? Who verifies that contractors are legitimate? Who ensures the money reaches its intended destination? In Iraq, these questions didn't get answered until billions had disappeared. Senators are asking them now, before the money moves, and they're not getting clear answers. That should concern everyone, because the time to establish oversight is before money starts flowing, not after. Once payments begin, once contracts are signed, once money is moving through multiple intermediaries, tracking it becomes exponentially harder. The best practices for managing reconstruction funds are well established. You need clear criteria for project approval. You need competitive bidding for contracts. You need multiple levels of review before payments are authorized. You need independent verification that work was actually completed. You need real-time auditing, not annual reviews. You need strong anti-corruption measures. And you need consequences for violations. None of this is complicated. Aid organizations, development banks, and reconstruction agencies have refined these practices over decades. The World Bank has detailed procurement guidelines. USAID has extensive monitoring and evaluation protocols. The UN has financial controls for managing funds in conflict zones. These systems exist, they're proven, and they could be applied to the Venezuela blocked account. But that requires planning. It requires resources. It requires a commitment to transparency. And based on Rubio's testimony, none of that groundwork has been done yet. The policy was implemented first. The money started accumulating, and the oversight mechanisms are still being figured out. That's backwards. Layer 2, the creditor problem. This is where the legal complexity explodes. Venezuela owes money to a lot of people. Bondholders who bought Venezuelan government debt. Oil companies whose assets were expropriated. Mining companies forced out of the country. Contractors who were never paid for completed work. Victims of human rights abuses who won court judgments. Court judgments have been issued. Liens have been filed. And all of those creditors are watching this oil money pile up in Qatar. And they want it. If that money enters the U.S. financial system, creditors pounce. Immediate seizure, legal attachments. The cash gets frozen while courts figure out who gets paid first. This process takes years. The money sits in limbo. Nobody benefits. So the State Department parks the funds offshore. Qatar becomes the neutral ground. The money exists in a legal gray zone where U.S. courts have limited reach. But U.S. approval is still required to move it. Clever. Also potentially illegal, depending on how you read the statutes. And definitely a nightmare for anyone trying to track accountability. Senators want to know what happens if creditors sue Qatar. If they argue the funds should be subject to U.S. court judgments, regardless of where they're physically located. Rubio does not have a clear answer. He says the legal team is reviewing options. Reviewing options. $200 million, multiple lawsuits already filed, and the legal strategy is still being reviewed. Here's what that means in practice. The State Department approved oil sales, set up an offshore account, started accumulating funds, all before figuring out the legal defense against creditor claims. That's backwards. You establish legal protections first. Then you move money, not the other way around. And here's the worst part. If creditors win in court, that $200 million gets seized. The humanitarian projects never happen. Political prisoners stay locked up, and Venezuela's government loses any incentive to cooperate with U.S. demands. The entire leverage strategy collapses. Because the State Department didn't secure the legal framework before implementing the policy. Senators see this. They're watching a plan that could fall apart the moment a judge issues the wrong ruling, and nobody in the administration seems concerned. The creditor issue is not theoretical. There are active court cases right now. Crystalex International won a judgment against Venezuela for over $1 billion. ConocoPhillips won a judgment for over $8 billion. Multiple bondholders have obtained judgments totaling billions more. These creditors have been trying to collect for years. They've pursued Venezuelan assets around the world. They've gone after Citgo, Venezuela's U.S.-based oil refining subsidiary. They've tried to seize oil shipments. They've attached bank accounts. And now there's $200 million sitting in Qatar, growing larger every week. From their perspective, this is Venezuelan government revenue, generated from state-owned oil sales, which should be available to satisfy court-ordered judgments. The fact that the U.S. State Department is managing the account doesn't change the underlying ownership. At least, that's the argument creditor lawyers will make. And they might be right. The legal theories are complex. Questions about sovereign immunity, questions about the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, questions about the validity of blocking statutes, questions about whether U.S. management of the funds creates a new legal relationship that affects creditor rights. All of this will be litigated, and litigation takes years. But the mere threat of litigation creates problems, because if there's a reasonable chance that courts will order the Qatar account seized, then the entire leverage strategy is built on sand. Venezuela has no reason to cooperate if the promised money might disappear into creditor settlements, and humanitarian projects can't be reliably funded if the account could be frozen at any moment. Layer 3. The geopolitical precedent. This is the part that should terrify everyone paying attention, because if the U.S. acts as a financial manager for Venezuela's oil revenue, what stops this model from being applied elsewhere? Iran, North Korea, Cuba. Any sanctioned country with natural resources, the executive branch could approve limited sales, park the revenue in a friendly third country, and use the blocked funds as leverage. No congressional approval, no inspector general, no public debate, just executive authority and a blocked account somewhere offshore. Senators see this. Kaine explicitly asks if this sets a precedent. Rubio says each situation is unique. Kaine does not look reassured. Because here's the thing about precedents. Once you establish that something is legally permissible, it becomes the baseline. Future administrations point to it. They say, we're just doing what the last administration did, and suddenly a one-time exception becomes standard operating procedure. This is how executive power expands, not through dramatic power grabs, through incremental decisions that seem reasonable in the moment but create frameworks for abuse later. Think about what this looks like in 5 years. A new administration takes office. They face a crisis with another sanctioned country. Someone suggests the Venezuela model: approve limited resource sales, park the money offshore, use it as leverage. And when Congress objects, the response is simple. This is established policy. The previous administration did it. The legal framework already exists. No new authorization needed. That's how precedents work. They create permission structures for future actions. And right now, during this confirmation hearing, that precedent is being set with minimal scrutiny. No written agreement, no finalized audit. Just a few senators asking questions and getting evasive answers. This is the moment. This is when oversight matters. Because once Rubio is confirmed, once he's Secretary of State, the pressure drops. The hearing ends, the cameras leave, and that $200 million sits in Qatar with nobody watching. Except it's worse than that, because confirmation hearings have a built-in limitation. The goal is to confirm or reject the nominee, not to conduct comprehensive policy oversight. So even senators who are concerned about the Venezuela oil deal face a choice. Do they vote against Rubio over this issue? Probably not, because Rubio is broadly qualified for the position. He has foreign policy experience. He's been confirmed to other positions before, and blocking a Secretary of State nomination over a single policy dispute would be unusual. So Rubio gets confirmed. The hearing ends, and the Venezuela oil deal continues with minimal oversight. That's the reality. The hearing exposed the issue, but hearings alone don't create accountability. You need follow-through. You need senators who continue to demand answers after the cameras are gone. You need oversight mechanisms that persist beyond a single news cycle. And you need consequences for non-compliance. Without those elements, confirmation hearing revelations disappear. They become footnotes, interesting moments that get discussed for a few days and then forgotten. So, where does this go from here? The hearing ended. Rubio got confirmed, and now he's Secretary of State, which means he's the person making decisions about that $200 million. Senators sent letters, Kaine, Merkley, others. They want the written agreement. They want the audit. They want details about who approved the oil sales, what conditions were attached, and how the funds will be monitored. As of now, those letters have not been answered, or at least not answered publicly. The State Department says it's working on a comprehensive response. No timeline given. Meanwhile, the money sits in Qatar, and Venezuela keeps selling oil, because here's what didn't get enough attention in the hearing. This is not a one-time transaction. Rubio confirmed that oil sales are ongoing, which means the $200 million is just what's been accumulated so far. How much more is coming? Rubio would not say. He cited confidentiality around ongoing negotiations. Senators pressed. He held firm. So we have an unknown amount of money flowing into a blocked account in Qatar. Managed by U.S. officials. No finalized audit. No inspector general. No written agreement available for congressional review. This is not normal. And the fact that it's being treated as normal is the most alarming part. Here's what you need to watch for in the next 30 days. Does the State Department release the written agreement? Does an inspector general get assigned? Do creditors file new lawsuits? Does Congress push back? Those are the 4 pressure points. And right now, none of them are moving in the right direction. The written agreement remains classified or incomplete. The inspector general position remains unfilled. Creditors are researching their options but haven't filed major new actions yet. And Congress has moved on to other confirmation hearings, other policy fights, other priorities, which means the Venezuela oil deal is operating in a gray zone. Not fully approved by Congress, not fully secret either, just existing in that space where executive branch officials have maximum flexibility and minimum accountability. And that's exactly where they want to be. Because flexibility means they can adapt the policy as circumstances change. They can approve payments quickly without bureaucratic delays. They can make deals with Venezuelan officials without having to brief Congress first. They can respond to opportunities in real time, all of which sounds good in theory. But in practice, flexibility without oversight is a recipe for waste, fraud, and abuse. The Iraq experience proved that. The Afghanistan experience proved that. Every reconstruction effort that prioritized speed over accountability proved that. And yet here we are again, making the same mistakes, setting up the same conditions for failure, and hoping that somehow this time will be different. Marco Rubio walked into that hearing and admitted the United States is acting as a banker for a sanctioned regime. The money is offshore. The oversight is incomplete. The legal framework is murky. And Congress is finding out through confirmation hearing testimony. That $200 million is the least important part of this story. What matters is the precedent. What matters is the expansion of executive authority. What matters is whether anyone with subpoena power cares enough to fight this. Day 1 of 30. This is just the beginning. And if you think $200 million in Qatar is bad, wait until you see what else got green-lighted while nobody was paying attention.